Welcome back to Amazon Unpacked, the podcast Amazon does not want you to hear. I am one of your co-hosts, Ira, and I am joined again by Dylan.
Hello, y'all. My name is Dylan, and I'll be returning as a co-host to this podcast for this week.
And what's our topic today?
We are talking about captive audience meetings.
What are those?
Captive audience meetings is when management brings you up to that boardroom they have on the second floor to basically talk to you about a bunch of Amazon related stuff that they want you to do and they wanted you to see.
Yeah, and specifically captive audience meetings they're a union busting tool, right? If a company finds out that its workers are talking union or its workers are getting agitated or its workers have been talking to a union, a lot of times they'll start holding these captive audience meetings, which they require people to come sit in them, the workers, and they tell you all kinds of things to try to scare you away from unionizing and unions, most of which are lies. Captive audience meetings have been banned. Prior to last week, they were banned in two states, Oregon and Connecticut. And the reason they're banned is because there's no way they can actually know what these companies are telling us in these meetings. There's no way they can actually guarantee that these companies are telling us the truth about unions. And what they found is that most of the time, these companies, they bring these workers into these spaces and they just tell them lie after lie with the explicit purpose of scaring them away from unions. So Oregon and Connecticut already banned captive audience meetings. And last week, New York State did as well.
Yeah, I feel like explaining what that law is supposed to do and supposed to mean in relation to what's going on in our warehouse is probably the best thing to do.
I just Googled New York captive audience meetings, and this is one of the first articles that popped up. Governor Hochul signed into law the Captive Audience Bill a day after it reached her desk. The law went into effect immediately upon signing. The new law prohibits an employer from disciplining employees who refuse to attend an employer-sponsored meeting, the primary purpose of which is to communicate the employer's opinions concerning religious or political matters. The law defines political matters to include the decision on whether or not to support or join a labor organization, a union. In essence, the law prohibits employers from mandating its employees attend meetings in which the employer attempts to dissuade them from unionizing.
And it doesn't even have to that captive audience meeting doesn't even have to explicitly be about anti-union stuff, right? They can mask it to push forward their agenda against one, right? Because that actually makes laws. This law would have been beneficial for when we did the petition.
All right, so Dylan, do you want to tell us a little bit about, there was a few months ago where they were doing these captive audience meetings where they were holding these and they were bringing us in and trying to scare us away from unions. What were we doing at the time that made them want to start union busting with these captive audience meetings?
The big thing is we presented a petition for higher pay, more lift codes, for us to be able to wear our earbuds in the warehouse, the understaffing problem, and treating us with more respect. And eventually, management did give us two of those demands. They'll never admit that these demands came from the petition, but they did.
And we did a big group hand in at the stand-up meeting at the beginning of the shift where we verbally delivered it. We tried to physically give it to management, but they refused to take it. So we verbally delivered it. And that's when the captive audience meetings started.
To be honest, that first captive audience meeting only served to piss off 80% of the workforce there. Because again, from my experience, none of our questions got actually resolved or even answered. They used a benchmark as almost a shield to deflect those questions away from themselves.
Right.
Because that captive audience meeting I was brought into talked everything about their benchmark rates and why they can't staff us properly or why they can't give us extra help and need to overload us constantly. When I asked the question as to why we can't have three water spiders on every side of the dock, they just kept going back to their benchmark rate, which only proved their point of they don't really mind understaffing of as long as they can reach that rate and how much their payroll is for that day. And me and another person, he's not working at Amazon anymore. We're basically questioning them constantly about their reasons and stuff like that. And the only thing they responded with is a benchmark rate. It sort of goes to show that these captive audience meetings are literally meant to try to almost forcefully, like, make us agree to their benchmark rates or like their practices in a way. I don't know if you were in the second or third captive audience meeting, if you want to talk about that a little bit.
Well, the different meetings I attended that they brought me into, again, one of them I'm not sure it would count as a captive audience meeting because they didn't even mention the word union. But it was like you described. It was like, one of our demands was stop understaffing us. We should have enough people on staff to do the work safely. We shouldn't be understaffed if 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 people take VTO. We should be able to have enough people hired that they can offer some of those people VTO and there's still enough for us to do the work safely. And it's like you described, they're like, oh, well, here's the numbers that say why we staff the way we are. And these are the numbers. So it's math, math tells us we've got to do this. But that's bullshit because that's their math. That's some arbitrary numbers. It's arbitrary targets they set for themselves. It's that Amazon has managed to do a certain amount of work with a certain amount of people, and to become more profitable, they set new targets and they say, now let's do that same amount of work or more work with fewer people. And those are the new numbers. Those are the new benchmarks they're trying to hit. So it might be that, your site level management has no control over those numbers, but they're still set by Amazon, right? So them telling us we have to understaff you because of the numbers. Well, those numbers are set by Amazon. Those numbers are set by Amazon to set benchmarks, to set targets, so Amazon can be more profitable and do more work with fewer workers. But that was basically one of the meetings, right? Where it was trying to use the metrics that they set for themselves to explain why they couldn't meet any of our demands. I didn't push back on any of that. I should have, but it sounds like you pushed back a lot more. So your experience in that was probably why they didn't bring you to subsequent captive audience meetings, right?
Yeah. All I did was ask a question. It
Yeah.
wasn't like I was unruly or anything. It's just like I kept asking questions with another person that was there. It's just like,
I wonder if that would sort of legally qualify as one of these captive audience meetings. I mean, my guess is they're telling you these things to tell you why, it's impossible for us to staff you how y'all want to be staffed, or, it's impossible for us to make changes because these metrics, they demand us to do X, Y, and Z. If we can't explicitly make the case that what they're doing there is trying to dissuade us from unionizing, then we probably couldn't make the case that that's a captive audience meeting. On the other hand, after we did our last petition, they did bring us in. They had captive audience meetings where they would take anything from like 4 to 10 of us at a time. And they would talk about what unions are, and they basically said, unions are a business, just like Amazon. They're in the business of making money. Now we're talking about a captive audience meeting. They're talking about unions, and they're also lying about unions, right? That's clearly a lie. And they're doing it for the purpose of dissuading us from joining unions.
mm-hmm. I was never invited to another captive audience meeting.
Yeah, they usually make sure to exclude the people who are pro-union and know about unions and can call them on their bullshit. They'll usually try to exclude those people from the captive audience meetings because they want to be able to put forward their narrative about unions without being challenged on it. And then after that, they started having captive audience meetings that probably would now be illegal under this new law. Some of the things that they communicate. And for me, they actually brought me, they know I'm one of the pro-union people. They brought me into it with only 2 other people. So there was only 3 of us in this captive audience meeting. And then there was like an HR person, and then, Kelly, one of the highest site manager, right? And they just said lie after lie. And they put me in there with 2 people who were new, who were clearly like anti-union already. And the lies were like, the first thing is, what's a union? Well, it's a business. Just like Amazon, it's a business. It needs to make money, and it makes money by charging you dues. And then in exchange for your dues, it gives you services. So it is just a service providing business that makes money off of the dues of workers. Number one, a union is classified as a 501c5. It's not a limited liability company, right? It's not even the same legal classification as Amazon. Legally, to have the classification of a union, its staff cannot be, it can't be profiting in a way that a company does off of worker dues. It has to be using that money to further the interests of its members, right? So just legally, by the bare legal definition, that was just a bald-faced lie. Then other things like, they'd say things like, if you join a union, there's no guarantee that you'll get a raise. And in fact, it's more likely that you'll get a pay cut, or it's at least as likely that you'll get a pay cut.
Excuse me? In what universe would a union ever advocate for a pay cut to its workers?
Well, I think the argument that they would make would be like, well, we don't want to be changing things up too much because Amazon's really doing the best it can for you right now. And if we bring in
Not at all.
Right. Well, also, to say that it's just as likely that you'll get a pay cut as a pay raise is another thing that is just factually wrong. Like, you can look at the Department of Labor statistics, and statistically, joining a union, you are more likely to make more money, have better benefits, to be more civically active, right? There's all these kinds of benefits that just statistically are indisputable. You are more likely to be paid more if you're part of the union. You're more likely to have better retirement plan. You're more likely to have better health care. There's just, you can't say that joining a union, you're just as likely to get a pay cut. It's possible, but you are far more likely to materially improve your well-being if you are a member of a union.
Yeah. And if they're doing it as an angle, like saying like, oh, they'll deny you a pay raise from the corporate body, that's the company that you're working for, just know, like, no one would stand for like a 25-cent raise.
Yeah,
like
well, also
Amazon gives us.
Yeah,
we would aim for like that $2 to $3 raise. Otherwise, we would have to put our concerted protective activity into effect at that point.
Right, we'd have to go on strike. And honestly, it's partially true what they're saying. Just voting to have a union, it does not win you a raise. Workers have to be willing to go on strike to get a raise. Workers have to be willing to fight to get those improvements. And just having the law recognize you as a union doesn't get you that stuff. But this is the whole point. They're misrepresenting unions as these third-party outsiders who can come and solve your problems. But no, a union is the organization we form to fight for our interests together as workers. And that is how you improve your livelihood. That is how you improve your well-being, by being part of an organization where you fight together and have each other's backs for the things that you need. But Amazon's not going to tell you that's what a union is. They're going to tell you it's this third-party business that comes in from the outside and takes your money.
That doesn't make sense. That, like, in what universe does the workers grouping together to organize so that the workers have better benefits? When would that ever translate to a third-party business ever coming in and taking away the money that you currently have?
It's true that if you call up a union, that a lot of unions that exist, they might be out of practice in terms of like organizing workers who are not yet unionized, helping workers who are not yet unionized. So they might actually come in and talk like, if you join the union, we'll get you, like, they might talk as if they're a third-party provider, but fundamentally that's not what a union is. And if there is a union coming in from the outside, like, that's just a union of other workers, right? You're just joining with workers from other companies. You're just joining with other workers who have already won a union themselves, and they're now helping you to win a worker. And it's true that, sometimes those workers or the staff of that union, the staff that is hired by those workers to help administer the union, it might be that sometimes, they come in and they have some wrong ideas about what a union is. It's true that sometimes they'll come in and they'll present themselves as like a third party that can come in and solve your problems. But that's not That's not what's going to solve your problems. What's going to solve your problems is you banding together with your coworkers to actually turn that union into a material fact in your workplace. That's when the union becomes powerful, and that's when you start winning.
So, with all that being said, right, let's go back to that law about captive audience meetings. Now that we put that in perspective to like why they did that at our warehouse.
Yeah, and they'll probably start trying captive audience meetings again because we're starting to get active again. We're doing flyers. We're doing this podcast. They're going to be scared. From what I hear, they have already started doing captive audience.
Yeah, there was a class last week, but I don't know if that happened before or after the signing of this bill that prevents them from using the captive audience meeting as an anti-union tool.
Yeah, so I think the important thing to realize is that the law can give us certain protections, but it's not going to fight our battles for us. This law, it bans captive audience meetings in New York. So what Amazon was doing after our petition, that would be illegal under this law. But all that really means is that we have the right to refuse to go to these captive audience meetings. And if management retaliates against us or disciplines us in any way for refusing to go to these captive audience meetings, they are breaking the law. So what Amazon could do is they could say, hey, do you want to come to this optional meeting? As long as they call it optional, they're probably going to be in compliance with the law. And as long as if we ask if it's optional, they say yes, they're probably going to be in compliance with the law. That doesn't change the fact that for the most part, when Amazon asks us to do things, we don't perceive it as they're gently asking us. We usually think they're telling us to do it, no matter how they frame it. It's hard to say no to the boss, especially when you're isolated. When you're not like with a group of fellow workers who might be able to call them on their shit. So this law protects us in that it gives us the right to say no to those meetings. But it doesn't say that they can't hold meetings to dissuade workers from joining unions. They can hold those meetings. We just cannot be required to attend.
Yeah, I understand that.
I think what's important for people to realize is that what they say in these meetings is so often lies, is so often misrepresentations, and it's a scare tactic, right? That there have been attempts to ban them even holding these meetings, right? And because it's considered free speech, like the boss can say what they want, it's very difficult to ban them saying these lies entirely. But what we have been able to do in New York and Connecticut and Oregon is to say that we as workers don't have to go to those meetings and listen to them lie.
Yeah. The only thing that like they could use to prove those lies would be if they took like the worst kind of unions that we have in this country right now and then like apply it to what they're saying. But those unions are usually more cozy with the boss than they are with the workers, though.
Yeah, exactly. Like to the extent that there are examples of unions that do things that are not in the interest of their members, of workers, it's usually because because the company has managed to sort of co-opt those unions and cozy up with them, right? So it's not even something intrinsically bad about unions. It's just the fact that the boss has managed to capture some of those unions and use them to their own ends.
Yeah, and I believe that if we were to band together as workers and fight for what we think we deserve, but and put that at the forefront, we would be able to organize this warehouse and get the kind of pay and the kind of benefits that actually would make this job bearable.
Yeah, and it's not just the pay and benefits, it's also the fact that as workers, we deserve to decide. We spend the majority of our waking hours in this goddamn warehouse. We deserve to have a say in how it's run. It is a dictatorship of management. So like a union is the answer to that. A union is how workers come together and say, no, we have a right to have a say. All right, on that note, I think we're just about out of time. I'm Ira. I am one of your co-hosts.
I'm Dylan, your other co host. thank you for listening to episode 3 of Amazon Unpacked.
The podcast Amazon does not want you to hear.